This will be a bit more sporadic, but I will be doing readings of bits and pieces of the Twilight Illustrated Guide, starting off with the section on vampires. Vampires, the central supernatural characters of the Twilight Saga, have existed in myths and local lore for centuries. While the saga's vampires share certain similarities with the vampires of legend, they may have more unique characteristics and supernatural abilities that are specific to the world of Twilight. Physical characteristics. In the Twilight universe, all vampires were originally human. As vampires, they retain a close physical resemblance to their human form, the only reliably noticeable differences being a universal pallor of skin, a change in eye color, and heightened beauty. Reaction to sunlight. In direct sunlight, the disparity between human and vampire becomes more obvious. The cellular membrane of the vampire is not as soft or permeable as in a human cell. It has crystalline properties that cause the surface of vampire skin to react prismatically, giving the vampire a glitter-like shimmer in sunlight. Edward in the sunlight was shocking. His skin, white, literally sparkled like thousands of tiny diamonds were embedded in the surface. Beauty. The common factor of beauty among vampires is mostly due to this crystalline skin. The perfect smoothness, gloss, and even color of the skin give the illusion of a flawless face. The skin reacts differently to light, creating an angular effect that heightens the perception of beauty. Additionally, the stone-like firmness of the vampire body creates a look similar to muscle, making any size human appear more fit as a vampire. Like humans, vampires are drawn to beauty. When choosing a human for the transformation process, vampires are as likely as humans to be motivated by a beautiful face and body. Pallor. Pale vampire skin is a product of vampire venom's transformative process. The venom leaches all pigment from the skin as it changes the human skin into a more indestructible vampire form. Regardless of original ethnicity, a vampire's skin will be exceptionally pale. The hue varies slightly, with darker-skinned humans having a barely discernible olive tone to their vampire skin, but the light shade remains the same. All forms of skin pigmentation, freckles, moles, birthmark, age marks, scars, and tattoos disappear during the transformation. Eye color. While all vampires have similarly pale skin, they can have a certain variety of eye colors. Vampires who haven't fed for a few weeks will have solidly black irises. Recently fed vampires will have deep red eyes if they drank human blood, and medium gold-colored irises if they drank animal blood. Vampires who have been newly transformed will have very bright red irises, regardless of diet. It is possible to disguise this feature with colored contact lenses, but the lubricant in vampire eyes breaks the contacts down quickly. One pair will last only a few hours. Vampires also universally exhibit dark circles under their eyes. These circles, like the changing irises, denote thirst in a vampire. They appear darker and more obvious when the vampire has not recently fed. Teeth. Vampire teeth appear the same as human teeth. The canines are not longer or more pointed than human canines. However, vampire teeth are unbreakable, razor sharp on their edges, and strong enough to cut through almost any substance, including vampire skin. Movement. Less noticeable than these physical features is the vampire's tendency towards stillness. Unlike humans, who grow uncomfortable after holding one physical position for a time, vampires are most comfortable when perfectly motionless. A common vampire reaction to stress is a statue-like immobility. Vampires breathe reflexively, as do humans, but they have no need for oxygen. They are able to consciously stop breathing for an indefinite period, but they find the sensation uncomfortable. Vampires rely on their sense of smell above other senses, similar to many animal predators. The lack of smell is what causes the discomfort from not breathing. Petrification. Some very old vampires are visibly different from others because of this stillness. If a vampire remains unmoving, often enough over thousands of years, dust actually begins to petrify in response to the venom-like liquids that lubricate his eyes and skin. Eventually, a vampire's skin begins to appear thin and translucent, like the skin of an onion, though the strength of the skin is not compromised. A milky film covers the eyes, making the irises appear pink in color. Again, the vampire's eyesight is not compromised. Fluids. Internally, the vampire system contains many venom-based fluids that resemble and in some cases perform the same function as the human fluids that were replaced. Only the saliva-like liquid in the vampire's mouth is venomous. A fluid similar to this venom works as a lubricant between the hard cells of the skin, making movement possible. Another lubricates the vampire's eyes so they can move easily in their sockets. However, vampires do not produce tears, as tears exist to protect the eyes from damage by small foreign objects, and those objects would not be able to harm a vampire's eye. Throughout the body, this pattern is repeated, with venom-like fluids performing the functions that are still necessary to the vampire. Most notably absent is the circulatory system. Physical change. Vampires are frozen in the state at which they are transformed. They do not grow older, taller, or wider, or experience any other physical change, including unconsciousness. Vampires never sleep. Their fingernails and hair do not grow. Their hair does not change color. Abilities and limitations. A vampire's physical and mental abilities far exceed those of a human being. Vampires can run in excess of 100 miles per hour. They are able to lift objects hundreds of times their own weight. Their senses are similarly boosted, giving them the ability to see, hear, and smell things imperceptible to humans. Their skin is harder than granite, rendering their bodies nearly indestructible. Their minds work many times faster than a human's are capable of, and all vampires have perfect recall. Immortality. Vampires do not age from the moment their transformation is complete. Vampires have no natural life cycle. They exist in this progressionless status indefinitely. This is a conditional form of immortality, as they can be permanently destroyed by fire. However, their speed and strength made it necessary to incapacitate them before burning them. Only another supernatural creature has the ability to incapacitate a vampire, by tearing her limbs from her body. Thus vampires are in no danger from human beings. A vampire who is incapacitated but left unburned has the ability to reconstitute herself. One facet of the absence of aging is that vampires do not develop emotionally or mentally past the age at which they are transformed. A transformed child would remain childlike forever, unable to mature in any aspect. Nutrition. Vampires do not have a circulatory system. Their bodies are harder than human bodies, but their cells are selectively porous. They receive nutrition only from blood, which, once drunk, is absorbed throughout the body. Blood satiates their thirst and makes them physically stronger, but it is not necessary for life. Vampires cannot starve to death. They can only get progressively weaker and thirstier as time goes on. They are not able to digest solid food. If a vampire swallows a solid as a subterfuge, that substance will sit in his stomach until he forces it back out through his mouth. Human blood is the most appealing to vampires and hardest to resist. However, they can receive the same nutritional strength from animal blood. Vampires do not need to feed as often as humans do. Drinking the blood of one human is enough to satiate a mature vampire for a week or two. Supernatural abilities. Most vampires find their key personality characteristics intensified by the vampire transformation in the same way their physical abilities are strengthened, but relatively few have abilities that can be classified as supernatural. Most common would be a human with a love of learning becoming a vampire with an insatiable scholarly curiosity, or a human with a deep value for human life becoming a vampire with the strength to avoid human blood. But a few vampires do develop additional abilities that go beyond the natural. These extra abilities are due to psychic gifts in the original human that are intensified in the resulting vampire. For example, a human who is very sensitive to other people's moods might develop the vampire ability to read thoughts or influence emotions. A human who had some limited precognition might develop into a vampire with a strong ability to see the future. A human with a good instinct for hunting might become a powerful vampire tracker. The proportion of supernaturally talented vampires to normal vampires is greater than the proportion of psychically gifted humans to normal humans. This is due to the same factor of temperament that results in more beautiful humans being selected to become vampires. Vampires are also drawn to gifted humans when they look to create companions. Some vampires actively seek out the gifted in the hope of utilizing that extra ability in their coven. Newborn vampires. A newborn vampire, defined as any vampire who is less than 1 year from his date of transformation, is different from a more mature vampire in behavior and appearance. The newborn vampire is plagued by an unrelenting thirst and will feed as often as possible. The thirst is so maddening in the first year that most newborns are more animalistic and wild than their older counterparts. They are marked as physically different by their vibrantly crimson irises, though in other ways they look the same as mature vampires. Their behavior is more diverse than their appearance. As they age, their behavior generally becomes more rational and constant. The transformation process. The transformation from human to vampire begins with a vampire bite. Once the venom coating the vampire's teeth enters the bloodstream of a human, it moves through the human's body, changing each cell as it passes. The spread of the venom is swift, but the reconstruction of the cells takes time. This process is excruciatingly painful, comparable to the feeling of being burned alive. The process lasts for roughly 2 or 3 days, depending on how much venom is present in the circulatory system and how close to the heart it entered. There is no way to circumvent the burning with painkillers. The most narcotics can do is immobilize the body. One benefit to the human is that vampire venom is capable of repairing all kinds of damage to the body. A human who had sustained a crippling injury would be made whole again as a vampire. Venom does have its limits, though. It could not, for example, regrow a lost limb. The transformation is difficult from the vampire perspective as well. Even mature vampires have trouble resisting flowing human blood. The scent affects them as it does sharks. They can go into a feeding frenzy. For this reason, vampires tend to not hunt in packs. During the irrational frenzy, members of a coven are likely to turn on one another in competition for the blood. The taste of human blood makes it even harder for the vampire to resist. It is nearly impossible for a vampire to not drain the human, thus killing him or her, once the vampire has tasted blood. Only vampires with a great deal of self-control are able to remain focused enough to bite a human and then let him live long enough for the venom to affect the change. Singers. There is another factor that can complicate this process for the vampire. The smell of each human is different, and certain humans can smell more appetizing than is usual to vampires. The more appealing any human's scent and taste is to a vampire, the more difficult it will be for that vampire to bite the human and leave him alive. Infrequently, a specific human will smell nearly irresistible to a specific vampire. That human is known as a singer among vampires, because his or her blood sings for the vampire in question. Singers are individual phenomena. A person whose blood sings for one vampire will not have the same effect on all vampires. While there are some humans whose scents are more appealing to the vampires in general, that appeal does not reach the level of a singer. Singers are considered by most vampires to be a great find, the drinking of whose blood is an experience to be savored. Vampire history. The oldest known vampire history is that of the Romanian coven, named for the location in which they originated, which would later be known as Romania. The most powerful coven during the time before 400 AD. Their power resulted from their numbers. The Romanians were the first to expand their single coven beyond the normal 2 or 3 vampires. They had to cooperate in a way unusual to vampires to accomplish this. See the transformation process for information about feeding frenzies. But their self-control extended only to their fellow vampires. The Romanian coven made no secret of its existence, and both preyed on and enslaved humans indiscriminately. The Romanians were overthrown by the Volturi coven between 400 and 500 AD. The Volturi coven originated in Greece during the Mycenaean era. It began with 3 original members, Aro, Caius, and Marcus, and then grew to a core of 6 as the members found romantic partners, Sulpicia, Athenodora, and Didyme. Ambition was their bonding element, much the same as with the Romanians. The Volturi actively recruited gifted humans into their coven. Eventually, using the basic argument that vampires should conform to simple laws of mutual convenience, the Volturi launched a successful war against the Romanians, who would not conform to these laws. the Volturi hunted the Romanians until there were only 2 survivors of the original coven, Stefan and Vladimir. The Volturi preserved ruling status over the years through coven strength and the policy of general non-interference. The Volturi coven is both the largest and easily the most talented group of vampires in existence, but they could still be overthrown if they gave the other vampires of the world a reason to unite against them. For this reason, the Volturi do not get involved with other vampires frequently and act against other covens only when there is a complaint that could negatively affect other vampires. Consequently, they are commonly perceived by vampire kind as a positive force. There are very few vampires alive who predate the Volturi. Most have been born into a world where the laws constructed by the Volturi are an accepted fact of life. This protects the Volturi from the realization that their laws are merely an excuse to exert control over the vampire world. The Southern Wars. One notable event during the modern rule of the Volturi was the war that engulfed most of the southern part of North America during the early 1800s. Precipitated by a vampire known as Benito, the conflict began when Benito created a small army of newborns in order to conquer the older covens that controlled the majority of what is now Mexico and Texas. His tactic was so successful that most covens in the area created their own armies of newborns to defend against him, and the other covens that were also reacting. The resulting disappearance and death toll was so alarming to the humans in the area that supernatural causes were suspected and reported, though the epidemic was later blamed on cholera. The Volturi eventually descended in force on the area and exterminated every coven that had experimented in the creation of newborn armies. Vampire law. The basic law of the vampire world is that all vampires must protect the secret of their existence. This affects vampire life in a variety of ways. Vampires must be circumspect enough in their hunting and behavior that humans do not become aware of them. Or, if a human were to become aware, the vampire at fault would be responsible for silencing that human. Neither of these is a particularly difficult task. As long as vampires' interactions with humans do not gain wider attention, there is no consequence to the vampire. Many vampires have relationships with humans to varying degrees, and as long as these stay within boundaries, the Volturi are not aware. However, if something suspicious, something that might indicate the existence of vampires, was known widely enough to appear in the human news, or even in human fiction, the Volturi would hunt the rumor to its source. Teaching the law. Vampire laws are not written down. To write them would in itself be an infraction. Vampire laws are passed by word of mouth from creator to newborn, and each creator is responsible for the behavior of his creation. If a newborn is abandoned by his creator, a rare occurrence given the difficulty of creating a new vampire, the newborn, though ignorant of the law, is still punishable for any rash acts. Immortal children. Sometimes group behavior will bring on a stronger response from the Volturi. The Southern Wars are one example. Another example would be the outlawing of immortal children. Immortal children were humans who had been transformed into vampires at a very early age. There was no absolute age limit set as to what constituted an immortal child. It was a subjective definition based on the child's ability to behave himself in a way consistent with vampire law. Like all vampires, immortal children were frozen at the mental and physical age at which they were transformed. Post-transformation, these small children continued to exhibit childish behaviors, including impulsive acts, tantrums, irresponsible activities, and a general lack of circumspection. These behaviors were incompatible with the law of secrecy, and immortal children often attracted the notice of humans. Another aspect of immortal children was their appeal. They were both beautiful and endearing. Covens were utterly devoted to their immortal children and would protect them at all costs. The Volturi found themselves punishing individual covens for the behavior of their immortal children with a much greater frequency than other occurrences of lawlessness. Because of the devotion inspired by immortal children, the Volturi were forced to destroy full covens in order to destroy an immortal child. After some study into the matter, the Volturi decreed that immortal children were not capable of following the law, and therefore it was no longer legal to create an immortal child. Anyone responsible for creating such a child would be destroyed, whether that child had broken the law or not. The Volturi continued to experiment with and study immortal children for centuries, but has never reversed its decision. Vampire myths. There are many myths about vampires, most of them created and put into circulation by the Volturi. Their purpose is to disguise the existence of vampires behind stories that could never be proven to have a basis in truth, and to make it possible for a vampire to easily prove that he is not a vampire to a human who believes the myths, by touching a cross or standing in front of a mirror, for example. Additionally, these myths give humans a sense of control over the supernatural. Though vampires are never in any danger from humans, the Volturi contend that human ignorance makes hunting more convenient for all. Myths circulated by the Volturi include: vampires are burned by the sun, vampires are always unconscious during the daylight hours, vampires have no reflection, vampires can be harmed by crosses, holy water, and garlic, vampires have visible fangs, vampires can assume the form of a bat, vampires must have permission to enter a house, vampires can be killed by a wooden stake stabbed into their hearts. Truths the Volturi were able to eradicate over time. Vampires have red or black eyes, gold wasn't a known option at the time, vampires reflect sunlight prismatically, vampires never sleep, vampires are nearly indestructible. Truths the Volturi were not able to quash: vampires are flammable, vampires are pale, vampires drink blood, vampires are beautiful, vampires are immortal. One benefit of the surviving truths is that there are humans who actually seek out vampires in an attempt to gain beauty or immortality. This benefits the Volturi when they want a human front as a facade. Vampire lifestyles and psychology. Though there are a range of vampire lifestyles, the most common is nomadic. The majority of vampires move frequently, never settling permanently in one place. This pattern is partly an attempt to hide from the notice of humans. If too many humans disappear from one area, suspicion might be aroused and the Volturi might take notice. Also, if a vampire interacts regularly with humans, eventually the humans will notice that the vampire isn't aging. Another aspect is boredom. Vampire lives are so long that many keep up a continuous search for novelty. A few covens are exceptions to this rule and maintain a semi-permanent or permanent homes. Doing this requires a great deal of subterfuge. If the coven wants to avoid suspicion and keep the Volturi from becoming involved, and most vampires don't care for the hassle. Bonding factors. Most commonly, a coven is made up of two members. One feature of the unchanging nature of vampires is that they mate for life. Once they fall in love, that feeling never fades. As a general rule, only the bond between mates is strong enough to survive the competitive drive for blood. Larger covens are less sustainable and usually end because of internal violence. The second bonding force, and one that is, unlike romantic love, able to keep a large coven stable, is ambition. Vampires are competitive by nature, and some vampires have been able to evolve this competitive disposition into a greater cause capable of uniting many individuals into a secure whole. The pursuit of power is the bonding cause for the vampires. The Romanians were the first to do this successfully for a significant length of time. The third and rarest bonding force is the vampire conscience. Very few vampires are born with or develop a value for human life. The consumption of human blood is such a known aspect of vampire life that few ever question it. The driving thirst for human blood seems irresistible. However, those who do learn to value human life in spite of this reality are able to subsist on animal blood. Vampires who live this way are sometimes referred to as vegetarians. Animal blood is unappealing to vampires and thus a difficult diet to maintain. Those who make the sacrifice, though, experience related benefits. In the absence of human blood, the competitive drive disappears. Vampires are able to form bonds of love in addition to the bonds between mates. The weak coven alliance is replaced by a strong family-like union. Vengeance. Another prevalent vampire trait, along with romantic bonds and the intense competitive streak, is that of a vengeful nature. Relating again to their unchanging state, vampires are not forgiving. They do not move past an insult or injury. The most common example of vampire vengeance is the aftermath of the loss of a mate. When a vampire loses his mate, he never recovers from it. He cannot rest until the party responsible, usually another vampire given the strength necessary to destroy a vampire, is eradicated. Centuries can pass without lessening the ferocity of his need for vengeance. Vampire hybrids. The biological passing of vampire traits is one of the least common exceptions to normal vampire life. Out of the thousands of vampires on the planet, there are only 5 known hybrids in existence, and these 5 all originated from only 2 sources. Male vampires do have the capacity to pass on genetic material with a human female partner. However, it is beyond the ability of most vampires to be so close to a human physically and still resist the lure of her blood. Also, vampires are so much stronger than humans that any loss of self-control at such close proximity can quickly lead to mortal injury in the human. Female vampires still carry ova similar to human ova, but the unchanging state of their bodies results in a total absence of a reproductive cycle. Even if the female vampire could somehow continue this cycle, her frozen body would be unable to grow and change to accommodate a growing and changing fetus. One hybrid, Renesmee Cullen, was created by accident as the result of a rare romantic bonding between a vampire and a human. The other 4 hybrids, Nawel and his 3 sisters, were all purposely created as an experiment by a vampire named Johan. Vampire hybrids have both vampire and human traits. They are much stronger and faster than humans, with sharper senses, but not as strong, fast, or sharp as a pure vampire. They are strong enough, however, that human females are rarely able to survive the gestation period. The movement of a hybrid fetus causes extreme injury to the more fragile mother. If the gestation is survived, the birth is not. The usual method of delivery for a hybrid is for the hybrid to make her own escape from the womb. The hybrid must utilize her teeth, which have more in common with vampire teeth than human teeth, to pierce the amniotic sac, a membrane nearly as durable as vampire skin. This is too traumatic to the human body to be survived. Only the introduction of vampire venom to the mother's system can heal the injuries incurred. Only one mother has ever survived to become a vampire. Like the amniotic sac, a hybrid's skin is almost as durable as her vampire parent's skin, but it does not have the same prismatic reaction to sunlight. Hybrids can also have supernatural abilities, though not all do. Like humans, hybrids have a circulatory system and are warm-blooded. They can eat solid food, but generally find blood more appealing. They also sleep. Their irises come in the usual range of human colors and do not change in response to diet. In the first few years of their lives, hybrids grow and change like humans do, though at an extremely accelerated pace. After roughly 7 years, the hybrid reaches physical adulthood and settles into the same unchanging state and conditional immortality that vampires enjoy. The hybrid mind develops much faster than the physical body. A hybrid has the mental capacity of an adult human by the time of her birth. Hybrids learn quickly to communicate with their caretakers, picking up their first language mere weeks after birth. This capacity for physical and mental maturation is what sets the hybrid apart from the immortal child.